What does it
Hmm.
do to a society when the young people are well educated in their own history and they appreciate and love their country?
Yeah, exactly. So what that does is, oh, there's several things that it does. For one, you have a well-rounded person, a student that can think about and be able to reason the good and the bad of their nation's history, because every nation has it.
Yeah.
You know, when they can reason through that and understand that, that's important. It also helps to expand and grow the culture of one's nation, to go further. If done properly, we truly do learn but from our mistakes, and we're better for it. In fact, I've always said that the American experiment has always been about taking the skeletons out of our closet. There's really truly, and I know this is going to hit the nerve of some of the 1619 folks and the groups and so forth and like that, but I don't care. We truly are one of the few nations ever that has admitted our mistakes and has learned from them and tried to be better because of it. Um, so when students learn and understand their history, um, they're actually they're proud, and I say that proud is in the good way, of being this thing called an American citizen. They understand who they are and what we're supposed to be about. Um, and it's and not only that, it's just an amazing history. I use primary sources all the time. The Declaration of Independence. Every state now has its own state test that they give, which really is based off of rote memorization because most of the tests are A, B, C, D. Okay. Let's take the concept of the Declaration of Independence. So if you so you probably get a question something like, okay, who was the main author of the Declaration of Independence? A, B, C, D. You choose one, right? Or another question might be, what are the inalienable rights listed in the Declaration of Independence? A, B, C, D. And that's just it. But if I could do an example with you, Julie, when I was talking about the principle approach, one of the things that I've learned and came across is this right here. This is called the American Dictionary of the English Language. It's Noah Webster, 1828. Yes, the same Webster dictionary that we have today, but this is the originator, and the definitions of things would be completely different. Now, let's take a look at the Declaration of Independence with regards to what I just said there. Um, when you hear the phrase, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Okay, so in a typical classroom, we're only going to cover the state mandated component because that's what the curriculum is. And, that's then we're okay and we can't get in trouble as educators. But that's not education. So let's break this down because I've heard people say, oh, our reading skills are so low, so these kids would never understand the vocab in primary sources. My argument is, so teach them.
Exactly.
Teach them. This dictionary covers all of the definitions of what would be in our founding documents. So I just did this a couple of years ago because, again, becoming principled approach as an educator, you learn how much you haven't been educated and how to teach. And I must have taught this for 20 years, but I never stopped to ask myself the term endow. All men are created equal with certain inalienable rights. Or all men, you get one, endowed by their creator. So I looked up endowed. Endowed means um, furnished with a portion of an estate, having dower settled, supplied with a permanent fund, endued. In short, what Jefferson is saying there is that you have an inheritance. Your inheritance are certain rights, life, liberty. He changed pursuit of happiness. John Locke talked about property, by your creator. Now, that right there alone takes out the argument of separation of church and state. That takes out the argument that Jefferson was a deist. That takes out the argument that rights do not come from government, but they come from your creator, and that creator is God. And my thing is that as history teachers, if you approach things from the primary sources and you approach them from that and you adjust your teaching to be able to teach from primary sources, then you got a solid leg to stand on. You know, in Virginia, the in the Virginia U.S. History Standard number 2 says, that you are to teach about the interactions of Europeans, Native Americans, and slaves, and what that's supposed to look like. So according to that standard, you're supposed to talk about the relationship of slavery and Native Americans and the colonists, right? So then you pull out your textbook, and then of course, what's your textbook going to say? You know, oh, the colonists, the English did horrible things to blah blah. I mean, and all. But if you look at primary sources, the primary sources does not show that at all. In fact, if you looked at the first charter for the Virginia, the Jamestown charter, right in the charter, it says that the reason why they were coming to Jamestown, yes, what economics, but it was all by the gospel for the native peoples. I mean, you don't get any more clearer than that. So even when the state standards is really kind of doing the wink, you know, and to make sure that you are supposed to teach all the evils and so forth, go to the primary sources. I would argue that if you're teaching that, and I'm not an attorney by any stretch of the measure, but I'm saying that if you're teaching by the primary sources, you document that, you show that you're still covering under standards, but you're doing it appropriately. Good luck on trying to get them trying to take your job. But unfortunately, what's happened is you do have a lot of teachers now that has bought into this. Some of this is because newer teachers are coming into it because this is what's part of their development, but also other teachers that's been in for a while, political persuasions that we all have has now leaned in that direction. So those that are trying to do what I'm saying is a minority. Some would argue, oh no, they're the silent majority. Well, two things for that. One, if they're such the silent majority, they better start opening their mouths because we're losing the whole thing. I have never had an administrator per se, question me with regards to my lesson. And I think the reason why is because I've got the primary sources that backs it up. So, we talk about, we say, oh, we can't mention God or we can't do this or that. Well, if the primary source and saying it, you can. You absolutely can.
That's for history though, but when someone's teaching other subjects that's not based on sources in the same way, then the books they read are more geared for the Marxist indoctrination. They're not
Right,
so much reading the
right.
classics. What do teachers do in that type of a situation?
I guess how I would approach it, right? So I was teaching one of these books. Um, First off, I would be sitting down, I'd be looking at my 1828 dictionary. I would start asking myself questions over the content in the story. And then I would possibly even start looking at talking about the dilemmas of the characters in a story, right? Uh, what are they facing? Think could happen? What do you think is the best solution? How would you handle this? So I'm still covering content, but what I'm doing is even in literature, I'm getting the kids to think outside or beyond that Marxist thought. And I might even throw in there too, especially on Marxist thought, something along the lines of, do you think that there would be a better idea do you think there would be a better solution or a different approach than this? So yeah, I understand what you're saying. Science is a perfect example. We're taught, you're supposed to teach the world is millions of years old and we've all evolved. And you can pull up even a history textbook that shows, you know, 30 millions ago, we look like an ape. And then it's just been in the last 5,000 years. So even in science, a science teacher would be if they point out the two broad theories, which is what I also do in history because it's covered now. And that is the old versus the young, theories. Now, when I say bring them up, I'm not saying that you're pushing one over the other. I'm not even saying that you tell the kids, hey, I agree with this one. You're presenting both. You're asking questions. You're pointing out where there's dichotomies. You're showing where, that there's differences, oppositions where they agree, and so forth. Example, for example, and you can get away with this, and in science too, I'm sure. It talks about the world is millions upon millions of years old, but yet it's only been in the last 5,000 years that we've had written record. Well, that's interesting because the young Earth Society would point out that the world is about 5 to 6,000 years old. And if you then pull in, like say the Genesis account, which you can for history and science as well, because talk about the Epic of Gilgamesh and so forth, you pull that in and you say, oh, the Genesis account is about 6,000 years old, and it clearly shows here that written accounts were being done. So that would actually fit into what the old Earth is actually saying of 6,000 years. So which is it? Are we millions of years old or are we roughly 6,500? And then you present that in a question format. Again, I do a lot of summary questions. I'll ask the kids, in your opinion, based upon what you now know about the old versus young Earth theory, summarize for me. Which one do you believe is more accurate? Provide details, as well. If a child can do that, answer that question with details, right? Then they get a good grade. They get a good grade because they did the question, not because they agreed with me. Um, and that could be in English, that could be in science, that could be in a lot of different things. My kids, they tell me all the time, and I take it as the biggest compliment. They say, Mr. Lamb, we love your class, but you make our brains hurt too much. They I guess they're trying to say in their own way that they're trying to make me feel bad or something, but I actually take that as a compliment because I don't think we make students' minds hurt enough. And here's the beauty of this. I almost cried because I was so touched by it. My kids I had um, previous year, and I told them, I said, I don't care who you are, take everything with a grain of salt from what you read, media, anything. Go to primary source if you can find it. It was interesting because this year, it was towards the end of the year, and it was for SOL testing, the state test. 4 of them came next door and said, Mr. Lane, we got some questions about World War I and World War II. And I asked them, I said, so where is this coming from? Because I could tell from the questions. And they're like, well, Mr. So and so is saying that this happened, but we're not so sure. So we wanted to hear from you what actually happened. Now, here's the thing about that, and I give all credit to the principal approach. We never talked about World War I and World War II in our class. We just didn't. It was World History One, you know. But the teaches you how to reason and come to understanding in things. Something was going off in their head. That is real learning and teaching right there. When you can start to reason, and you're not just taking it because a teacher says that that's correct.
I mean, it seems to me that a lot of people in all industries and all institutions are silenced because they don't want to lose their jobs and they just go with the system because they have to provide for their families. They have to make a living. And
Yeah.
and it seems that that's the case in all these different institutions. What would you say to someone who's concerned that they might be putting their career on the line to stand up for these things? What would you say to them?
Mhm. I would say the same thing that I had to arrive at and say to myself. Yes, there's a very real possibility that you could lose your job. Yes, I know. I've probably been under the microscope for a couple years, but it comes down to this. All of those things are important, but do you really want, and if you're a believer, do you really want to face a judgment day and have to answer the question of, I put you in a position to stand up for this. Why did you not? You know, to me, I look at it also too. Is this job so important that I would be willing to go along with the lie of messing with a child's head on their being confused on a gender? You see what I'm saying? When you start to put it in perspective like that, yes, your livelihood is important, and I am not taking away from that at all. But messing a child up as far as who they are, who God made them, or to continue to teach a lie in in English or science or history over and over again just to maintain a job, you got to put that in perspective. Which is more important?